Kirsty A. writes, I usually make chronological yearly albums, but I have so many photos from my trip to the Harry Potter studios, I've decided to make a separate album. I want to make a title page, but I can't decide what to include. Just the title and date? Or one photo? Or a collage of all my photos? Glitter Girl, can you help Kirsty A. tackle tip-top title pages?
Of course I can. My short answer to your question is that I use multiple photos for the title page if the album spans a longer span of time. And if it's a short event, lots of pages from a relatively short time, then I use just one photo on the title page. So I have a couple examples for you today, and then I'm going to take you through a title page that I'm going to create for an album, and I'm going to show you a little look at that album before I get started. So I've pulled out two different title pages here. This is from my Harry Potter album, and I used just one photo, a photo that I really liked because of the idea of going through that giant door to enter Hogwarts, but not a particularly storytelling photo in any other way. There's not people in the pictures, there's no other characters, and it's just a door. So you can find this whole page in a start to finish video earlier in the Glitter Girl series where I talked about all the different embellishments going on there. So that's the title page of my Harry Potter album. And this is the title page to my backpacking album. Unfortunately, the layout itself looks a little bit like it's been backpacking, so let that be a reminder to take good care of your pages and not be so harsh on them if you take them on the road. So this is just one particular photo, and it was relatively quickly when I started back at well, when we were backpacking, I wasn't scrapbooking at all. So I had about a 4-month break from crafting, came back, and then tried to remember where I left off and tried to remember how to do all this. And this was one of the first pages I made with one of my favorite photos from the trip that was just a scenic photo, because I wanted to bring in color and then just start to play with different motifs and different supplies. So the different things that you see here are all things that appear elsewhere in the album. There are airplanes here and there, there's wood grain here and there are maps definitely, and the craft cardstock backgrounds run all the way through the whole album, along with this little bit of glimmer mist painted here and there in just a slightly darker tone than the craft cardstock. But as I developed the album more, I started adding in more motifs, so almost all of the pages have a camera, and that's not here on the title page. So sometimes I like to come back to the title page and make a few little adjustments. In this case, I'd probably look for a camera motif to add around here, because what I did add here was a rub-on that didn't particularly work well and has started to flake off a bit. So I think I might start looking for a small camera motif that I could add in here, just to kind of bring that up to date with how the rest of the album has come together. Now, so that's a title page that I made before I made much else in the album, and then the example I'm going to take you through today is the other way around. Now, I did decorate the cover of the album, and this is my album from an Alice in Wonderland tea party. So literally I have an entire album about one afternoon, and I'm completely okay with that, and I realize that that is completely off the scale of acceptable for some people. Too many layouts about one day, but my rule is that if you're enjoying scrapbooking the photos, then just continue and don't question it. So if this is a crazy idea for you, don't worry about it. You can imagine this as any sort of theme of album that you would like. So some of these layouts you will have seen before. For example, this was the January edition of 4x6 Photo Love way back in 2011. But it's not a true title page. This just happens to be the first layout that went in the album. So there are lots of pages here, but they're all quite different, well, not entirely different in style, but there's not a lot of purposeful keeping things in one way or another. I do repeat a lot of colors, and I repeat a couple motifs like butterflies here and there. There are lots of quotes from the Alice books. Oh, this is an interactive page that's also from 4x6 Photo Love. And what I would like to do is to create a title page that will give me a little bit more focus with this album, and then I can go back to the remainder of my photos and make a few more layouts to kind of finish off the project that will help bring everything together. Because as you can see, there's different styles and different colors appearing here. And when I finish this album, what I like to do is sit down and read through all the journaling I've written on the different pages and make sure that I tell all the stories I want to tell. Now, I don't ever consider albums complete or incomplete. So when I say finish, I just mean that there might be a few gaps that I want to fill in the relatively near future. But when this album goes on my shelf, if one day I decide, you know what, I'd really like to scrap Alice in Wonderland Tea Party pictures again, I'm completely okay with making another layout about that topic and putting it in the album, because I have to keep the idea that scrapbooking is for fun first. And so sometimes it's just because that's what is enjoyable, and also because perspectives change over time. And sometimes something else might happen to the people or the relationships and the people in these pictures, and I'd like to go back and tell a story that relates to these photos in some way, but has changed with the passage of time to mean something a little bit different. So that's why I don't consider any of my albums complete or incomplete, but all works in progress. And this is the album that I'm going to make a title page for today. And I have a photo that was always in kind of my highlight photos from the day, but had been a bit more of a challenge to scrapbook. So I'm going to use this picture of me with the rainbow cake that was particularly epic on the day, and use that as my title page for my Wonderland Tea Party album. So here is a look at all of the supplies that I've pulled out, and this is a little over the top in how many supplies I've pulled out, but that's because my process for creating a title page where I've already created pages for the album involves looking at two things. I want to look at what I want to bring out from this particular photo, which is the rainbow scheme of the cake. So I have pulled out a few elements that fit that rainbow theme, but then I also want to keep in mind the different things that I pulled throughout the album that repeat, so that I can have a little bit of continuity and introduce those elements right from the title page. So when I looked through the album, the things that I included were pale blue shades, all different shades of pale blue, large layered florals, and butterflies. So what I've pulled out are some rainbow elements, including this rainbow card from a Project Life core kit. That's from the Honey kit, I believe. And the same sort of idea, but in muted colors, an ormolu die cut. And I have a rainbow pattern paper from Crepe Paper that's going to form the very back layer of my layout. But then I've also pulled in those other elements that repeat throughout the album. So I have pale blue paper, that's a pattern from Here and Now. Then I started looking for florals, and this one doesn't appear to look like you would use this full sheet with everything else that I've pulled out so far, but what I'm looking at is just cutting out these flowers, because the large layered florals are something that I've repeated throughout that album. So I looked for a few different large floral elements. So I pulled out that Echo Park paper from their Valentine collection called Love Story. There are also some large florals here in the Here and Now sticker sheet, and this sticker sheet from My Mind's Eye, Kate and Company. So I won't use all of these, but I wanted to go through my stash and look for anything that could be useful in repeating those different elements. So this is where I've come to this sort of mix. And then just pulled other things that seemed like they might fit the theme and work well, bringing all that stuff together. So I have some different cloud elements, including the soft clouds and the more graphic style clouds, some elements that mix pink and red, because I want to include both on the page. So sometimes it can help to have one element that has both those colors to just cement the fact that I really do mean to include those things. And I'll start creating a title page that's going to bring together that rainbow motif with all the other elements that I've already included in my album. I'm going to start with the rainbow as my 12 by 12 background, but then I'm going to layer the light blue pattern on top of it. And this is actually something you may have noticed a few of the Garden Girls do. I love this bright, bold rainbow print, but it's quite overpowering unless you're putting it in an album where all the patterns are very, very colorful and energetic. If that's your style, then grab a few sheets of this and use your photos right on top. It will definitely work, but where the rest of this album is softer in tone, I want to include that rainbow around the edge, so I'm going to use it as the background. And there are a couple other examples in the garden where you can see different scrapbooker styles on top of this rainbow in the background. So here the rainbow will show around the edge, and I've cut out some of the different elements from the cut apart sheet so that instead of being overwhelmed by the full sheet and trying to pick out the pieces that would match and work with my layout, I have them cut out and ready to go. So I'm going to start layering some paper and figuring out where I want things to go. And I'll admit that when I do a title page, because it's going to be the first thing that is seen in the album, I tend to block out where I'm going to go a little bit more than my usual scrapbooking process. I tend, when I'm scrapbooking just any other page, to just stick elements down as I go, and this is a little bit more plotted out than that because I just want to make sure that it's going to bring everything that's in the album together, and I can spot little things that will or will not work. For example, right here I've started to place this rainbow element right next to this rainbow element, and they're too similar. They're the same print in different scale. So I know that I want something that's going to separate those two. So I could bring in another piece that's a solid color, that's one of the colors in that grouping, and maybe tuck this behind and find something that I'm a bit happier with. And this also allows me to see where things are going to go on the page. On a title page, I don't leave a lot of room for journaling. I tend to keep my longer stories for later in the album, but I will want to include enough to make it obvious what this album is going to be about. So I'll need space for a title and space for some journaling. But I can see from this point that I'm really wishing that I had something more in this part of the page that was pink, because I have this area of pink and some small bits of pink here, but I'd like to balance it out. So I could try adding my floral up here, but in most of the layouts where I've used that large overlapping floral, I've kept it close to the photo. So my instinct was to bring this further down here and work it into an area of embellishment around this corner of the page. So perhaps the better idea would be to use an element of pink paper. So I have my pink die cut card, and I could use this up in this corner of the page, and that's going to balance out the pink. Now this is a very different style than these two elements here, so I know that with the layers that I add on top, I'm going to want to bring in something that's a bit more vintage, a bit more delicate, but this does bring that color scheme together, so I'm okay with the different style. And so I can also go ahead and emphasize the difference in the style by bringing in something else that's in the graphic style here, which is going to coordinate but be different at the same time to this cloud print here. What I do realize now is that I'd like more of that cloud print to show so that it's obvious what it is. So I think I'll just move all these other page elements down a little bit so that you'll be able to see more of the cloud paper. Both those 6x6 are from the Maggie Holmes Crepe Paper pad. And there was a large floral in this as well, and I almost went with that floral instead. I marked it so I could show you, because this is a lovely large overlapping floral as well, but so much harder to cut out than this design, because this was pretty much clean, a rose on a white background with little hearts and polka dots, where these flowers are all overlapping, so it's going to be difficult to get a full blossom without another piece coming into the design. So that's why I went for this one. They're very similar in color now that I've taken this out of its 12 by 12 pattern. It's not quite as obvious that it's so very different. So that's an easier rose to cut out. And one little tip, well, two little tips really, for cutting out detailed pieces from pattern paper if that's something that you want to work on. One is to move the paper, not the scissors. I know a lot of people find that small scissors work really well because you can get into the smaller spaces of the design. What I do is cut out an area just around the element that I'm going to cut out, so that I'm no longer working with that full 12 by 12 sheet. and I use my giant scissors. Now, I don't think that giant scissors necessarily help. What is important is that you need the pair of scissors that you can become one with your hand. So I use these scissors all the time. You see me use them pretty much every video. So I know exactly where they're going to cut, and I don't move the scissors, I move the paper with my other hand. This way, all the scissors have to do is one long cut, and that's why I like using the bigger scissors, because it means there are fewer tiny little cuts like this, and I can just do a lot of cutting all in one open to close of the blade. Okay, so that was the first tip, move the paper, not the scissors. And second tip is to cut inside the line of the design, because if I cut on the outside and have this lovely little white frame around the edge, and it's a lovely look, I love how it looks, it's much harder to cut because you have to get the design exactly right and have that border be pretty much uniform all the way around the edge. But sometimes the pattern's going to be too difficult to cut out, and it might be that it's certainly possible, it's always possible to do detail cutting, but whether you want to spend the hours and stress of doing it is another thing. So for example, the edge of this leaf has all these little serrations and the little point at the edge. If I cut on the outside and leave a white frame, I have to go around those and make them all equal and get all the detail. If I cut inside and I'm not leaving a white border around the edge, I can cheat and I can round off the shape. Now I've just done a really extreme round off and I've literally made it into a very simple leaf, but you can play around with which details you will and won't include, and when you get to a point where you just look at what's coming up and think it's way too much to be worthwhile, you can just round off that edge and not have to worry about getting it absolutely spot on correct. So that way you can cut it out a little bit easier and it goes pretty quickly, so that you don't have to worry too much. So those are my two top tips for improving your detail cutting if you want to cut more designs out of your pattern paper. I was definitely happy with this portion of the page, so I've gone ahead and stuck all these layers down. I'm starting to add some pop dots under the corners just to bring up a little bit of dimension. And then I want to work on this space up here. Now that's where I was planning to put my Project Life cards, and I've already ripped this one in half. The reason, well, it's not evenly in half, but I've ripped it into two pieces. And that's because I want to have a little bit more of this pattern to bring somewhere else on the page, so that if it, in the end, when I get the design all nearly finished, if it seems like these clouds are a little bit too out of place, I can use that same pattern somewhere else, even if it's just a little strip or a punch design, and I can just use the bit that would have been covered up there to bring in that pattern again and make it feel like it belongs a little bit more. So I've already gone ahead and just torn that into two pieces, since I knew that I was going to tuck this underneath and the whole card wasn't going to show. But it's the top edges of these two cards that are making me want to change them a little bit at this point. It's not that they have this different style. I'm quite happy with the mix of the different styles here, but everything else that I've used so far has normal straight 90-degree corners, and these have the rounded corners. So my plan is to straighten this edge off, just run it through my paper trimmer and turn this one into a square instead of a rounded edge. And with this one, I'm going to cut away the pink to create the actual file tab shape, so that it will have a little different style than just being a rectangle of paper up at the top. So that will hopefully get rid of the one little element about them that wasn't particularly coordinating well to my eye. So I'll just straighten that edge. And then the other thing I'm doing on this particular page is not edging everything in brown ink, but with some things, instead of adding brown ink around the edge, I'm filing them with a nail file to add a little bit of lightness or distressed white edge there where the paper and the core of the paper will show through. Just I wanted to make sure that I didn't make the page too heavy with vintage tones. And I know I tend to use brown ink on most of my pages with cream based patterns, but I wanted to just have that little bit of lightness because these two papers with brown ink just seemed a little bit heavy. Next, I want to continue with the large floral pattern and work a little bit on making that continuity element appear, the large floral with a butterfly. So I have my two flowers. Now actually I've cut the same flower but in two different sizes, so they're facing the same direction. What I'd prefer for them to do is to face an opposite direction. So where this one is kind of bending out toward the page, I'd rather this one bend out the other way. So if I place that on top, it's going to be obvious that it's the same piece. If I tuck it underneath, then that rose isn't going to be so obviously the same. So I'm going to be adding a little bit of dimension there. So I'll just stick a pop dot there so that I can see where it's going to go before I peel the backing off. And I want a rainbow element in this area to bring in that part of the page as well. And don't want it to cover up so much of the rose that I can't see that. And then it wasn't just large florals that I had repeated through this album, but the idea of large layered florals. So I had a look through the other floral elements that I'd picked out, and some looked a little bit better than others. I have this sticker from the Caton Company embellishment sheet, and I like this effect, layering this kind of string of roses to come up from behind this pattern paper and kind of join the paper to this little grouping. But there's only that one sticker with that particular floral. There's another yellow rose on the sheet, but it has a black border, and I think that's going to be a little bit too disjointed. So what I want to do here is to dissect the sticker before I stick it down. So I'm looking to see exactly how much I'm going to use, and then I'm going to cut away this little bit at the end and use it on the opposite corner of the page. So I'm just going to keep it here so that I can add it in there momentarily. So this bit is going to hide underneath all these different layers. And again, I think the pop dot's going to help it all seem layered and not just plastered down to the page. So go ahead and add that there. Then these elements are paper, so I need to add adhesive to those. And I'll bring in that small yellow floral down in the bottom corner. And then I need to find a way to include some butterflies, because that had been the running theme throughout the whole book, was these layered large florals with some butterflies thrown into the mix. And when I started looking through my supplies to find what would work here, actually there are nowhere near as many butterflies right now in the collections as there were maybe a year ago. So they were a little bit harder to find because I don't tend to keep a lot of supplies for a long time. But I do keep tools that can help me with things like that. So I definitely have my butterfly punch if I can't find anything else that's going to work. And there are some butterflies still appearing in collections. So there are a few tiny little butterflies mixed in with the here and now embellishments. There's a little yellow one here, a little turquoise one there, and a few other collections that have tiny little ones like that. So between those small stickers and then a few tools like a punch or a stamp, I think I can bring in some little bits and pieces. There's also some great tiny little Jenny Bolin butterfly rub-ons at the moment, but they're all black, and I think that would look great on a page that has a harsher color tone, but where I've used all these kind of soft tones, I think it's going to be too much. So just like I'm going to continue to use this little yellow sticker instead of using the yellow blossom that's on a black background, I'm going to try to keep the tones matching and all in that limited color scheme to set the tone for the whole album. Since it's the opening page of the album, I wanted to dress up the title a little bit, so I'm going to do some layered lettering as well as the layered flowers. I am starting with these remarks stickers from Amy Tangerine by American Crafts, and they're a bit translucent and different shades. So I've just started writing it all out, starting at the end and working back, and I'm going to then place my letter stickers to form the real title on top of that, so that this will be legible as an idea, but it won't be the overwhelming title of the page. So I'm using the paler shades. I didn't have, because I've used this for a couple other titles in that same color, I didn't have all the same exact lightest shade. So I've used the two lightest shades and it still works really well together. There's not very much difference between the two shades. And you can see the pattern through the stickers, so it makes it a lot more subtle than the kind of letter stickers I'm going to use on top of that, which are these rich turquoise letters from Alison Craft at Webster's Pages. So I'm going to pop those over the top and spell out my title so that it should all be legible, but this will be more of a subtle word rather than taking your attention from the very beginning. Now my title and my journaling is in place. I went ahead and separated the journaling or the title stickers just a little bit so that I could have the contrast of the hot pink underneath the turquoise letters, which made them a little bit more legible. If you use a contrasting color on top of the Amy Tangerine stickers, they would really work well to have that background effect. But because the colors were so similar, I thought it was a lot easier to read if I brought it onto the contrast of the pink background. And for my journaling, I decided I would have one line that tells you what it is, where it is, so I have the date, the fact that it's a birthday party, and the person that the party was for, and then used a little bit of writing here to bring it into character. So the card here says, because one never dares to turn down an invitation from the Red Queen, and that's because the girl hosting the party was actually the Red Queen, and I know that I wanted to set that from the beginning because when one goes to a Wonderland party dressed as Alice, it may seem that it was my party, and it's not because the Red Queen was the host. So that's really obvious when I read the journaling on the other pages, but I wanted to set that tone from the beginning. I think sometimes a title page is a great way to make sure that the album makes sense from the beginning with any little details like that. So now I have my photo, I have all of those motifs that I wanted to include with the exception of the butterflies, which I'm going to work on soon, and I have some space to go ahead and start working in my my further embellishment, because I tend to think that a title page is a great place to have a little bit more room to embellish, and I brought in a little bit of the Rainbow Stripe Project Life card and the cloud here, so I'm also going to use that as the spot to place that other floral sticker. And just place that behind there. Really small little detail. I know you're not going to see much of that striped paper at all, and that's absolutely okay. And then I want to include my butterflies. Well, what I did with the single rainbow printed Project Life card was to get a few stripes, and then I got 4 butterflies. So I can add in a butterfly here and there, say right about there, and I'm just looking at what color might be best. Maybe go for the contrast of the green here, because that same green appears there in the stripe because that's cut from the same card. And I don't need to save this space for journaling because I've written my details there already. And I have some space here that I want to join this little grouping here closer to the title. So what I'm going to do there is something a little bit more delicate. I don't want to overwhelm the title, so I'm going to use some rub-ons. I have a pink floral there that should be a good match to the other elements that I've included. And then I think I might also include some text rub-ons here or there. I really like this little banner that says "Remember that one time," because that is literally something that we say all the time, those of us who are at the party, and it's a bit of a joke that we all have these Wonderland costumes in our cupboard, and wouldn't it be nice if we could just wear them, you know, just for a picnic all the time. So I think I'll include a few more of those and bring the rub-ons up into this area as well, and layer those up. And I just tend to cut them out so that I can space them around and see where they would be best. For example, here I'm looking, at first I saw this gap and thought it would work well here, but then it's kind of hovering, and this is a dimensional piece and the rub-on's going to be flat. So if I bring this down to the edge of this paper, then that will help join all this together, because right now I have this big expansive paper that's kind of separating the two elements. So I don't want to add a lot so that I'm covering up the pattern, but to add a little bit might work quite well. So I'll tuck those in and then just add a little bit of embellishment on top that's going to have a little bit of a different finish, looking for some gems or enamel dots that will give me a little bit of something that's not a paper texture. At this point, pretty much everything's represented. I brought in lots of different rainbow things to go with this particular photo, and I've managed to repeat the pale blue, the large layered flowers, and the butterflies. So I have all of that in place. Last little thing I wanted to do was add something that was a different texture, and with groupings like this I tend to add a little bit of mist around the edge, but looking through the album I haven't used mist on on very many of those photos. Almost all of them are mist free, so it seemed a little bit safer to not use mist on this layout since it doesn't appear throughout the rest of the album. But I can go ahead and add some gems or enamel dots or anything like that. That definitely does repeat throughout the album. So I'm going to use some in an aqua shade and some in a hot pink to just add a little bit of color around these. Now, your challenge this week is to create a title page for any album that you would like. Do have a look, if you've already made pages for that album, at what you've already made and see if there's anything you want to use to mix with the inspiration from the particular photo or photos that you might use on the first page, and see if you can pull the two design elements together and create something that gives you a little bit of continuity from the beginning. But if you are making a title page for an album that you haven't started yet, this gives you the great opportunity to pick what elements that you might be able to repeat throughout your album. So have a look at your supplies, see if there are colors or patterns or motifs that you might want to repeat throughout your book, and you can choose a few of them now and then put the supplies that you use on that page to one side so that you can use bits and pieces of them throughout your album. You can use any style you want, stay true to this scrapbooking style that you use. It does not need to have as much embellishment as this, or it could have far more, depending on what you like and what makes you happy as you craft. I hope you enjoy thinking creatively about title pages, and I'll see you soon. Thanks for watching.
Join us next week for the continuing adventures of Glitter Girl and the ongoing mystery of the scrapbooker behind the mask at twopeasinabucket.com.